The mission to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, Operation Midnight Hammer, went about as well as using a hammer at midnight would go. We hit something, but aren't really sure if it was what we were aiming for, and the noise woke up the neighbors and made a lot of people really angry. The United States spends more money on its military than the next 9 countries combined. But who runs those operations ultimately determines how effective it is in carrying out its mission to deter war and ensure our nation's security. As the dust settles on the undoing of a decade's worth of diplomatic efforts to prevent war against Iran and Israel, it's worth looking at who's in the room and what sort of strategic military minds have been tapped for Trump's war cabinet. But before we get into the details of who's responsible for planning and executing the strike, here's a reminder of who's in charge of making sure there aren't any terrorist attacks from these sleeper cells Iran claims to have on standby. Trump appointed 22-year-old Heritage Foundation intern Thomas Fugate to run DHS's counterterrorism program that was created after 9/11 to make sure there wasn't another 9/11. Apparently, Trump didn't like that the bulk of this department's time was spent on preventing domestic terrorism from his supporters on the far right, so he moved its resources to immigration enforcement and put this guy in charge after the actual terrorism prevention expert resigned in protest, creating vulnerabilities that can now be exploited by far-right terrorists, both domestic and abroad. We caught a glimpse of what the dynamics were during a press conference with 2 of the main people involved, a lifelong service member and someone who plays one on TV.
The battle damage assessment is ongoing, but our initial assessment, as the chairman said, is that all of our precision munitions struck where we wanted them to strike and had the desired effect.
Seating in the Situation Room during the attack can be broken up into 3 cliques: sideliners, sycophants, and the serious players. There were 2 people in the room who were only there because they're required to be. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and NSA Deputy Director Andy Baker. Before the attack, Gabbard, who, long story short, is very pro-Russia, which is Iran's ally, committed a cardinal sin among cabinet members. She contradicted Trump. A few months before the strike, Gabbard very definitively stated that Iran was not building nuclear weapons. Trump said Gabbard and anyone else in the intelligence community who agreed with her was wrong and kicked her out of his inner circle.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
But as the person in charge of all U.S. intelligence, defense, and security agencies, she couldn't not be in the Situation Room. And based on her recent attempts to get back in Trump's good favor, even if she was welcomed back, which she clearly wasn't, it would be to sit over at the sycophant table. Baker is a nobody to Trump, so he was nobody in that room. The reason he's even in there is because he used to be Vice President J.D. Vance's national security advisor, until he was brought in to help Marco Rubio moonlight as the national security advisor. Baker does have both of their ears and is very much an isolationist, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. But this strike was the opposite of that philosophy, so if he was talking, no one was listening. Next, we've got the sycophants. People there to give the president an ego boost and reassure him that whatever decision he makes is the best one and any outcome is the best case scenario. Chief among them is Trump's backup choice for Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who wasn't part of the decision making at all until she ended up in the Situation Room. She's been a close ally to Trump ever since he bribed her not to investigate Trump University when she was Florida's AG. Bondi's got no military experience, but she does have some international relations expertise. Bondi had to register as a foreign agent in 2019 because she was a lobbyist for Qatar, one of Iran's close allies. And her work as a lobbyist is really her main area of expertise. Her job is to lobby the public on behalf of Trump, almost as a glorified press secretary, towing the company line no matter how blatant the lie, and using the power of her office to arrest and intimidate anyone who goes against the administration. The actual press secretary was there too. Caroline Leavitt's been lying to Trump her entire adult life, and in all reality was there as more of a fan than an advisor. No military experience and no international relations other than being very anti-immigrant.
They illegally broke our nation's laws and therefore they are criminals as far as this administration goes. I know the last administration didn't see it that way, so it's a big culture shift in our nation to view someone who breaks our immigration laws as a criminal, but that's exactly what they are.
Chief of Staff Susie Wiles was there, which isn't out of the ordinary. She's a lifelong political operative who's credited with steering Trump's 2024 campaign to victory. She was hacked by Iranian operatives during that campaign, though, so she might have a chip on her shoulder about that. And she also worked for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's re-election campaign in 2020, where she was instrumental, because if he didn't find a way to keep his seat and retain power indefinitely, like through a war with Palestine or Iran, he would face charges of corruption and fraud. All that to say, Wiles' role in the war room is more likely to be as an advocate on behalf of her former client, rather than the American people. Wiles' deputy Dan Scavino was also there. No military experience, no international relations, just a professional troll. He's run Trump's social media account since 2015, and has been known to make alt accounts to rally Trump's base and incite violence on the darkest corners of the internet. He wasn't in the Situation Room to offer advice. He was there to figure out the best way to spin bombing the Middle East into owning the libs. And well familiar with those dark corners of the internet is Vice President J.D. Vance, who already admitted he didn't know what was going on.
Is the United States now at war with Iran?
No, Kristen, we're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program.
We learned from the leaked signal chat about an airstrike in Yemen that Vance doesn't agree with Trump on getting the US military involved in the Middle East, but will only say so behind his back. He's a very open isolationist, so these attacks all but confirm that Vance, whose time with the Marines was as a military journalist, either doesn't have Trump's ear on international affairs or is just there to cheer him on. And speaking of that signal chat, Defense Secretary, former Fox News host, and aspiring recovering alcoholic Pete Hegseth has already proven his dedication to national security and keeping a cool head when he added a journalist to an unsecured line where he was discussing top secret maneuvers with emojis, and then yelled at reporters who asked about it during an Easter egg hunt.
They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies.
Hegseth's been a professional cheerleader for Trump since 2016, and nothing's changed since then. His role as Secretary of Defense is to offer the president affirmation, not advice. Next up is CIA Director John Ratcliffe, whose background in intelligence dates all the way back to Trump's first term, when Ratcliffe had his boss Tulsi Gabbard's job for about 6 months. He landed the Director of National Intelligence role by lying about his experience taking on terrorists as a federal prosecutor. He didn't, and it looks like he still doesn't have much experience in that realm. Most of what he did in 2020 amounted to using his access to international intelligence to try and help Trump's re-election campaign. Even though that didn't work out, he's still considered a very loyal guy. So this time around, he's been demoted to lead the CIA. Marco Rubio is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, but his main role is the president's fall guy. Rubio does have international know-how, but that's taken a backseat to being in Trump's good graces. He was a war hawk, then shifted to be less of an interventionist when Trump somehow managed to campaign as a no-wars president, and has maintained a fluid stance to mirror whatever Trump wants ever since. This worked out well for him in the sense that he simultaneously holds two of the most important diplomatic positions in the country, but only because he acts as a rubber stamp, offering no real intel or insight beyond what Trump wants to hear. The last three people who were part of the decision to bomb Iran can very loosely be described as the serious players. They're in their positions not because they agree with whatever Trump says necessarily, but more so because they're ambitious, opportunistic, and their stances either currently align with what Trump wants, or they're a voice on behalf of someone that he listens to. Except David Warrington. He's a lawyer. White House special counsel, so he's just there to make sure they don't break any laws. Or that if and when they do, he knows what's going on so he can lawyer them to safety. Now, as special envoy to both the Middle East and Vladimir Putin, billionaire Steve Witkoff is there to make sure that whatever happens, rich people's money is safe. He has no diplomatic experience, but his wealth and proximity to Putin afford him a level of respect from Trump, who he has so far unsuccessfully tried to maneuver away from bombs and back to diplomacy. And last but not least, there's General Dan Kane, who is by far the most qualified person to be in Trump's war cabinet. Unfortunately, he's not qualified for the job he's currently in. Kane is the only person ever appointed to be Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman who wasn't a 4-star general. And in order to even appoint Kane, Trump had to waive the legal requirements for the position that are written in the United States Code. In other words, he ignored and broke the law to install Kane, and of course nobody in a position to stop him did anything about it. The reason Trump went to all that trouble is because Kane had lavished praise on Trump during his first term, and he claimed he could defeat ISIS in a week if he was put in charge. And that's who's running the largest military in the world, with a commander-in-chief who cozies up to dictators and autocrats who are starting wars while isolating the US from its allies.